Welcome back, friends, to Rose and Prose.
As you can
Hey,
see, we are definitely in two different places recording this.
yeah. Last week you saw us in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, and this week we're coming to you from the north and the south. I am up in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where it is lovely but raining.
And
Randall,
I'm
looks pretty
in
nice where you are.
I'm in New Orleans, where the temperatures are reaching 100 every day. It's quite a cruel summer, so
Yeah, but not in a good way, cruel summer, right?
not in a good way.
Like not in the Taylor Swift way.
Not in the Taylor Swift way.
I always love the Taylor Swift references across the board that every week Jen chooses a Taylor Swift song to use. It makes me so happy. It just makes me so happy. Well, let's get into it. Last night was hometown dates. So she went to Devin's hometown, Jeremy, Jonathan, and Marcus. And started with Devin's, which, it could be editing in terms of the order. We don't know. Definitely seemed to me like it was the most comfortable date. She met all of his friends. They went running. She joked about him being Pete Davidson, which I feel like when you can really rub your partner, like make jokes, that you're like in a good place. What did you think about that date?
So, honestly, I caught the tail end of it right before they went to commercial.
Okay.
I had we're in two different locations, and so I was kind of tidying up the house once I got back to it. And then also the Democratic National Convention was last night, which is absolutely must-see television.
Must see.
And so I was watching a few minutes of that before you messaged me, and so I had to switch channels. So I didn't exactly catch the first few minutes. What I did see, however, was that, yeah, she was definitely more comfortable, more natural. I felt like as the episode went on, maybe it was because she was moving around and just kind of collecting all of these experiences, but it just didn't feel good. The other dates, the other hometowns just did not feel very strong or good. And so what struck me though was that the way that she ended those dates, there were these declarations of love, and with Devin, he said that he was falling for her, and she seemed very non-committal to that, very non-responsive. Whereas with the other guys, which we'll get into in a few minutes, they were being a little bit more vocal with their feelings, and I think what I noticed consistently was the non-responsiveness that Jen had to all of this. So that's what I noticed, again, only at the
Yeah.
tail end with Devin.
Yeah. I appreciate the honesty that you needed a little nudge from your wife to watch The Bachelorette. But and quickly to tie in the DNC, I'm actually in this video gonna link to Sammy's 6-minute summary of the DNC from last night because it's really phenomenal, and I highly recommend that folks watch it. I think part of that, like not reacting in some ways, is because she's the Bachelorette and she's making hard choices when you get down to 4 people. And I also felt like some of them were telling her things because she needed to hear them if they wanted to move, like if they wanted to keep going. Jonathan, he was one where he says, like, I'm really guarded. We know he's not in love. He has said that. But then by the end of the date, he does say, like, I'm falling in love. And then she did respond, I'm falling for you too. But I felt like, while I really like Jonathan and I'm actually excited to see what next week looks like for them, it did feel a little bit like his family told him, like, you need to open up yourself and tell her how you're feeling if you
Hmm.
want to actually be in this with her.
Hmm.
Okay, can we talk about Jeremy for a second? So I thought that was a really interesting date. So Jeremy's from New York, or the hometown date was in New Haven, and his mom to the camera said, like, I remember when Jen became the Bachelorette, and she said, these are the things I'm looking for. And I said, that's not my son.
It's not my son. Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting because I don't think that people are honest about that, like, it is actually a two-way street. It's not just Jen picking him, it's also him picking her. It felt really, like, honest and real. But I am curious, like, did Jeremy feel pressured to say he was falling for her after, again, that was a situation where, like, his family was like, if you love her, you need to tell her? Like, are these guys getting pressured by their moms? Do our moms pressure us into saying things? Yes. But, like, how much of it was himself, do you think?
I think the entire experience of seeing Jeremy and his family, I was struck by the hollowness of it all. I felt like we opened up, they went to this, he seemed very, I don't know, it just felt very strange the way that he was introducing her to the date. And so they went to a grocery store, which I don't think that I can really say anything about that since our first date involved us going to a grocery store. However, you and I did not try and stand in the aisles and juggle avocados and kind of have this very forced experience for the cameras. I just felt like from tip to top, the whole thing felt bizarre and uncomfortable. Even at one point, he kind of looks off camera and he's like, oh my gosh, that's my aunt, as though you don't know that your aunt is going to show up to this televised date. Like, get out of here. I didn't believe any part of it. What I thought was most real was the mother who kind of broke that fourth wall and was like, yeah, that is not my son. And I think that it just became more clear the longer that Jen spent time with him. He was not going to give her what she was looking for. It was very much for the cameras on both sides. I felt like, yeah, that there was definitely a discrepancy in the level of honesty here that shined through in ways that the grocery store could not fix or patch over.
Yeah. She also, like, the date started at, like, a creek or a lake of some sort that was very muddy.
Yeah.
And unless it was just the editing, like, it literally looked like they were there for 3 seconds to, like, hey, this is my favorite park. Okay, now we're going to the grocery store. And she's, like, wearing white boots and, like, gently stepping through the mud. Like, I'm like, ooh, maybe change your first date at location if it's, like, going to be really muddy.
Also, I mean, Jeremy's mother was telling her that he needed to open up. I don't think that should be heard as a mother saying, yeah, you should definitely open up with your partner. What I felt like was she was telling her son, you need to kind of drop the act. And I think this is something that is a symptom of the hometowns, that if you have not said things, you kind of have to make that Hail Mary at the very end. But when he declared his love for her after saying, you know, oh, well, we're just having fun and we're just hanging out, and then kind of putting that on the table, it was like, so that's your Hail Mary, is that she's leaving town and you're like, oh, I love you, I definitely love you. It felt desperate. It felt just, again, for the cameras, it felt very fake. But I want to get to this in a second. I don't think that it was just on Jonathan's side. I think that Jen was definitely in front of the cameras as well. So let's talk about Jonathan.
No, I want to hear. Tell me more.
Let's finish the dates and then we'll come back.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had said, you know, Jonathan, his date, I felt like he said he was guarded at the beginning, and then he did end up coming around to her. Honestly, his date wasn't super memorable to me.
100%.
I'm not sure why, but they kind of have, like, the same rhythms, I feel like. It's like, okay, I think maybe, is it Jonathan or Marcus that she plays lacrosse with? See? I don't remember.
Sorry.
But I don't know. And then I feel like, you know, Marcus had really talked up his sister. And she was definitely, like, protective and close. I was a little disappointed that the adoptive parents weren't there
Yeah.
because he made it seem like they were really important too.
Yeah.
And so that was like kind of sad for him. But Marcus kind of dropped down for me in that date.
How so?
I I think he's just really not far enough along, and I think like we've seen that in the previews of what's to come next week, and I just think like she really cares about him deeply. You can tell. I think it was actually in that date where she cried when his sister was like, you know, how do you feel about him? Because I think she feels really conflicted that like she does really care for him, and he's not giving, like he's not far enough along. And so I just feel like he's got to go. I felt like I want to get into you talking about Jenn and the camera, because I felt like Jenn was actually like really honest with all of the families of how far along she was with the guys. Like, I don't feel like she said, oh yeah, I really care about him if she didn't, or like, I just felt like she was very practical and a realist with like where she stood with the guys. But you clearly feel like she was what, talking for the cameras? Tell me more.
I think that meeting families, meeting people's very close circle is always difficult. I mean, I think that you wanted to save this conversation about meeting the families for this episode, for the hometowns. I tried to talk about it a couple of weeks ago. And I think that meeting families is always very tough, because not because it's difficult to kind of go into that inner circle, but because these are people who have watched you, who know you, who have seen you angry, who have seen, you know, the weird stuff that you laugh at online. And so these people actually know you. And you, in starting a relationship, are kind of performing. You have this dating persona. I mean, I have a dating persona. I know you have one as well, you know, and so it takes time for the real you to come through. And what I saw with each of the hometown visits is that the family, the friends were saying, you know, be authentic, be yourself, stop performing for the cameras. But Jenn, we don't see that. What we see is Jenn in front of the cameras performing, you know, juggling in the middle of a grocery store, which was weird as F. Going to this creek just for the cameras. And so when the family is asking these questions, which definitely was my experience in meeting your family. I mean, I felt like your mother grilled me. She said that wasn't the case. We talked about it just a couple of, Patty, your mom and I talked about it a couple of days ago, and she was like, well, that's not what happened. I was just naturally asking you questions. And I'm like, no way, no way.
Yeah.
You were definitely vetting me. And that's good. That's okay. I think that is a good, healthy thing. However, when it comes to these shows, you know, when you meet the family, you're only getting one side of it. And I think that when we see Jenn's family more, that it will be interesting to see their version of her. Because in this episode, all the families were essentially telling the guys, you need to be real, you need to show up, you need to be more authentic, you need to drop the act. And they were saying it in coded language, again, for the cameras. You don't want to go to town on this guy and eviscerate him. You want to build him up. But Jenn, in her responses to the family and the friends, was I felt very guarded. You know, she was saying, yes, I'm definitely feeling things for them. But what does that mean? I mean, I feel things all the time, and they're not always positive. So what does that mean? Yes, I'm definitely feeling things. That's a non-committal response. I feel things about him. I can see us being together. I can see me driving the same car for the next 20 years. Like, again, that doesn't really mean anything to me. So I think that there was a lack of transparency, that everyone was very much performing for the cameras. And I think a lot of stuff comes out in the hometowns, you know, when you meet the family. In past relationships on my side, I mean, I've had family members who will comment, I mean, outright to to my partner's face will comment on the size of their boobs. You know, all kinds of really strange things can come out of these meetings. I didn't see any of that.
Previous partners.
Previous
let
partners.
us be clear.
Yeah. What I think really came through was just how guarded everyone was, how protective the families were of the guys, and rightfully so. I don't fault them for that. But I think it's pretty obvious that all of the families were saying there is a degree of superficiality here, and I think Jenn is also part of that, is cultivating it. I mean, when you agree to the dates that she has had so far, where you're handling snakes and wild animals in Australia, where you're going to all these exotic places, but you're not actually developing an emotional depth, I think that that's what the families are speaking to, is that there is no emotional depth here. From the guys, from Jenn, who is this person? She's giving non-committal answers, and even in the debriefs with the families are still saying, yeah, I'm not entirely sold. She can be a good girl. She can be a good person. I didn't really feel as though any of the families said, she's good for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think, kind of moving to talking about Jenn, is that I think that Jenn is very much a product of the performance herself. Agreeing to these dates. Jenn really shared nothing about herself with the families. She took
it as an input.
Yeah. Her response was deflective, was reactive to the questions that she was being asked. It didn't feel as though she was really volunteering any depth. And I think at this point, I think that Jenn is the issue. And I'm reluctant to say that, and yet at the same time, I think the reason why I'm reluctant to say that is because it's just so consistent with the nature of reality television that when you are cultivating yourself and your image, and as a second writer here, and your relationships, and as a third writer, your dating personality in front of the cameras, there's really just, it's tough to be yourself. And I think that she has become a product of that, that she's not herself. And I would really question at this point if she's even capable of doing that.
Wow. So you blame her and not the producers?
Oh, no, I think it's the entire system. Yeah,
okay.
I think that she is a product of the system, of what the producers are doing. I mean, mentioning the producers, at what point are you as a producer saying, gosh, Jonathan, as an example, Jonathan is so underdeveloped as a character that the date is inside of a grocery store. You were a producer yourself. Yeah, Jeremy, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You were a producer for television yourself. I've produced broadcast myself. At some point, you're really kind of grasping to put this character inside of a context, inside of a narrative. And baby, in the middle of a grocery store, that ain't it. At a pond for 3 seconds, that ain't it. On a sofa across a table, and you're just kind of struggling to meet this person's brother and sister-in-law who met online, which is just like reality TV. No, it's not. No, it's not. Stop with all that. And I think that, again, Jenn is a product of this. And I think because of the nature of it, I am not confident that she can come through as a real authentic person.
Okay, so I want to know, if we had a hometown date, like if we were on The Bachelor, let's say whatever, you're taking me to your hometown, what does that, what town would you choose, and what things matter to you that you would show me in that town? What would that date look like?
I think that I do not think that I would show you where I grew up, because that I spent so much time there, and it was so damaging to me in so many ways that I could not look at any street corner and not have a bad memory. That's the truth of it. So I think I would probably show you another town where my family currently lives. Both of my parents, although they are divorced, they live in the same city again. And I think that I would show you, you know, where I work, where my family's houses are, where I went to school. You know, I'd probably share a few memories. And I think that I would try and focus on the more positive elements of that. But I'm me. So all of that, I think I would lightly introduce, you know, hey, what were your childhood relationships like? Who were your best friends? Why were they your best friends when you were in middle school? You know, hey, my dad worked on this house for 14 years. You know, what kind of major projects have you or your family been involved in? You know, that's where my family went to church. You know, tell me about your stuff. I wouldn't show you an effing pond and be like, hey, that's weird. Haven't seen that in a while. You know, I wouldn't do stuff like that. I would try to have emotional depth. That's me. How about you? What would you show me?
Um, well, I feel like we kind of had a hometown when we traveled to New York for our first trip together, and we went
Yeah.
to the Poconos where my parents live. Though that's not really home to me, and home to me is such a hard thing because I've lived in 10 states. But I do think that my childhood on the main line in Pennsylvania, left a lasting impression on me. And so I think that I would probably take you to the church that I grew up, spending Wednesdays and Thursdays and Sundays at with my friends. And I would probably try to maybe get you onto a squash court or a softball field, and try to find the tree that we carved our names into when we were younger, and then try to show you why those places and those things meant so much to me.
Yeah, totally.
But home is a hard word, I think, growing up, I guess. But I am grateful to truly feel at home in our home together in New Orleans. So Marcus, Jonathan, and Devin all got roses. Jeremy went home, which I think, lines up with
Yep.
the vibe that she's going for.
Yep.
Next week is Fantasy Suites, so TBD if she gives everyone the option to spend the night together in Hawaii, which, that just looks lovely. We should go to Hawaii. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. And then Men Tell All, which will be full of drama with Sam coming back, and Tom. Can't wait to see that. So it's going to be a lively week next week. Definitely took a lot of restraint to focus on The Bachelorette this week. And I'm grateful, to put it behind and to get to watch the exciting speeches coming out of Chicago this week. So
Absolutely. I want to say again, like, the DNC is must-see television this week. I mean, last night alone, you had senators dropping comedic one-liners. You had former presidents. You had husbands cheering for their wives. I mean, across the board, you saw people who were enthusiastic about a candidate and not, ripping their shirt off like a Hulkamaniac. I mean, talk about performative masculinity at the Republican convention was just absolutely disgusting. Last night, what I saw was a lot of people who were very enthusiastic about a candidate, and I'm going to say it outright. I'm supporting Kamala, and I hope the people who are listening and viewing this do as well. I just don't see the Republicans putting out any candidate that is worth attention or time. So.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you all
next week
from New Orleans.
Bye.